Thank you for starting the recording. And you getting a little glimpse of Sobol and how it might be able to help your organization or the ones you're working with. So I have Brian Peters here, who is the co-founder of Sobol. Brian, when did Sobol, when did it come to the world?
Yeah, I mean, early experiments were starting in early 2018, and then yeah, so it's more or less been since then.
Cool. So it's a startup, and I found out about Sobol from someone who attended a prior class. I think it was in Canada, who I met at a conference and knows Brian. And so he reached out to me and said, "Hey, I think this is something you'd like to hear more about. It really resonates with the work you're doing in integral and agility and finding new ways to help organizations look at their structure and even work with the structure they already have, but think about it differently and actually in ways that they're working already." So hooked up with Brian and had him show me more about it, and immediately thought, wow, this is a great tool. There's nothing like it out there. I'd like to bring this in. And so I usually talk about it when we start working in the lower right-hand quadrant with the structures and systems as a tool to use to do that. And so created a partnership with Brian, and Brian's got an interesting background, which I know a little bit about, and he can share a little bit more if he wants to. But what I really love about his background is that it combines the technical engineering side. So he was a director of engineering. He was also a director of product and marketing. So he's got kind of both sides there. So he really understands what business needs, and technically is this something that we can actually do. So I appreciate his background there. And also he has a disposition towards startups and this entrepreneurial spirit. So if I understand your background correctly, Brian, you actually created Sobol to support what you were doing some time ago with a distributed portfolio of companies that were startups.
Yeah.
A number, like over 30 startups. And so you created this to help those startups.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
so
large
it's
global remote incubator for startups.
Great. So he brings all that background and is the co-founder of Sobol, Sobol.io. You may have seen reference to it online. And so anyway, I'm going to turn this over to Brian to go ahead and get us started and tell you more about it and show you more about it.
Awesome. Yeah. No, thank you, Michelle, for the intro. And it's been a lot of fun sort of getting to know your work and understanding how, as a tool, and some of the flexibility that we provide, there's opportunity to support all that good work that you're doing with coaching in organizations, and asking the question, what does Agile look like in 2021 and beyond? And how can we take a more integral approach to this? So without sort of a chance here, I'm just wondering what screen am I sharing at the moment?
Transformation webinar, Sobol.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're good. So I'm just going to, I used the slides just to put together a small, quick little intro to get a sense of like where Sobol came from, and you know why we did it, and then that will kind of launch into a nice little demo. Try to keep things free form and lots of room for Q&A at the back end, allowing the demo to become more dynamic and aligned to sort of what you're interested in as you show up. So
yeah, great point, Brian. I did want to mention that. So we will have a good time for Q&A. We're going to try to leave some good time. So you can pop your questions in there at any point in time you want. I'll moderate the Q&A as we go.
Perfect. So I should be full screen deck now. Quick check before I launch in.
It is.
Okay, great. So introducing Sobol. So yes, as Michelle said, my experience is, although I'm quite passionate about startups and trying to understand, you know, as startups scale up, how do they maintain that sort of magical agility, alignment, camaraderie, sense of purpose that can happen in those smaller scale teams? And part of that comes from my early background, which was actually, I was a mechanical engineer before I got into software startups and the whole tech scene. As a mechanical engineer doing project management on major procurement programs for passenger rail, working between government and large industry and large enterprise types of organizational structures. And so having had a career across sort of a large spectrum of different types of organizations, different sizes of organizations, very different organizational styles, because coming down to my more recent experience that Michelle was alluding to with the Consensus Blockchain Global Incubator, which went from like 200 to 1,200 folks working in a distributed portfolio of startups, remotely across the whole globe, and watching how that group, by contrast to the enterprise groups that I was working with early on in my career, this group was extremely agile. It had no reporting lines. Folks were moving in and out. It was very dynamic resourcing across the startups while they were incubating in the portfolio. And Sobol was birthed to kind of understand, when teams start to work more in this remote, distributed, and agile paradigm, where what we're trying to build and how we're accountable to building it, and how we're organized to do that, starts to come up with new organizational patterns. How do we keep track of that? How do we stop it from trending to chaos? And that's been the Sobol journey as we incubated inside that portfolio to help support them. I'm going to do a quick intro. Some of this might just be like a recap of things that are very core and understood for the broader group here, but it was very influential in why we built Sobol. So from Stephen Covey's The Speed of Trust book, trust dictates speed. So above all else, success in business requires that competitive strategy and superb organizational execution. But as we understand and have experienced, many of us, as we collaborate with our clients or within the teams we participate in, distrust is really the enemy of both and slows things down. Again, another one that many are probably familiar with is the Tuckman Model, and of forming a team, storming, and then starting to create those norms and performance patterns within the team. What's always interesting to me in this one is how important relationship-oriented trust is in those early phases to carry us through that storming phase. So that's why we do kickoffs. That's why we do offsites. That's why we talk about our values and how we want to work together in a relational sense in the early days. To form that bond, it's going to carry us through the lack of structure and challenges that lay ahead in the storming phase. But in order to graduate out and not regress back, we need to start to put in structural forms of trust to create a far more sustainable form of trust. This often takes the form of agreements around how we're going to work together that are explicitly documented, practices, processes, agreements around how we meet, agreements around how we make decisions, how we form into various roles that we're going to play in service to the team, what the team is actually trying to achieve, getting clear about the goals, how we prioritize projects. These are all the types of things that start to come into that phase. And the interesting thing I've always found is, like, in startups, it's actually really easy to pull that off because the team is quite small and they go through this quite naturally, and they maybe even can norm and perform without high degrees of documentation or some form of formal structure. But what inevitably starts to happen is you get to this team of teams, nesting starts to occur. It starts to grow and the complexity starts to increase, which really can enhance the trust erosion. So at a certain size and complexity, relationship-based trust just isn't possible. Many talk about this as Dunbar's number, hovering around 100, 120 folks in an organization. You just can't keep track of it in your mind. And that's when structural trust really needs to be established. And then the other element of this is that, today's markets are demanding that our organizations change and change quite continually. And so that org agility that's being demanded of us requires lots of change, and that change can create what I call like storming cascades, where the teams add new individuals or change the goal and therefore change their structure and do a small little reorganization. And the end result is each of these little teams is on their own curve of that storm and norm, and they can be moving around, and that can have effects at the cross-functional team level where they're effectively trying to do this in collaboration across many teams. And this complexity really starts to sort of break things down, where we can end up with lots of questions emerging, like who's accountable for this project? How do we prioritize between these two different lines of business? How do we make these types of decisions? I thought Team X was going to handle that. How come that's fallen through the cracks? And many other symptoms that can start to emerge when we're sensing into this complexity and its effect on trust as these things are changing. So if that's kind of the problem space that has always piqued my curiosity in the team of Sobol, we started to evaluate what were we trying to do and why was it not quite working for us. When it came to org charts, they didn't embrace this complexity. Yes, they were one form of structure and explaining, reporting lines and how functions and business units were structured. But this was kind of like the skeletal structure. As we enhance agility, we've got muscles and tendons on that skeleton really moving around and changing. And that alone was not enough to help us have a clear understanding of the structure of our organization. The other thing that happened was our goals didn't always feel well connected, and that created alignment issues. Teams would have their goals in disparate spreadsheets or presentation decks, or maybe in the platforms that we were working in, but those platforms themselves, sales and marketing and Salesforce, and execution and operations and development teams in Jira or Trello or similar, often had a hard time being able to get a good picture of how they were coordinating and how these goals were connecting together and were in service of the larger strategic objectives of the organization. And the last part, of course, was the implicit agreements. It took a while when somebody onboarded in a team to just observe the practices of the team and sort of come to understand how we were all working together. And it was because we didn't have sort of explicit agreements around our working practices in a lot of cases in the organizations I participated in and had the opportunity to observe. And connecting all of these together and maintaining them in that agile and dynamic environment was often the challenge. So you need that dynamic accountability, clarity on the structure well beyond the org chart, all the hats that we're wearing, not just the titles and reporting lines, to get clear on who's responsible for what. Explicit agreements, how we work together, and agile alignment so that our goals are staying connected even as they're changing, so that everything from the goal or project objective, KPI, can find a way to trace across the different teams that are collaborating all the way back to some form of organizational strategic objective. So this is the stuff that inspired Sobol. And of course, while you're doing this at high speed, you need to be able to do so in a way that is transparent. And this doesn't mean just stuffing it into some document on a SharePoint or being able to ask questions in MS Teams and get answers. The trick is that everybody has to have functional access to all this information and understand the relationships between it. And so that takes me into why we built Sobol and what we were trying to do when we did it. So this is an example organization in Sobol. When it comes to viewing the team structure, we have many different views, but we often like to come back to this circle plot. A circle can be almost anything. It can be a team, a function, a project team, a scrum team. It could be a standing meeting that happens every month, across a function to coordinate and make decisions. It can be a working group that is spun up to solve a problem and may spin down tomorrow. We've seen our customers and clients use Sobol to draw their structure in many, many different ways. Some can be service-oriented teams or lines of business that are market-facing, and then having internal centers of practice where we can see different groups and different disciplines and how they congregate and share information and knowledge and set standards in the organization. And so this circle structure allows us to plot a lot of different things. So let's take a look at our fictitious org here and their revenue operations group for fun. So when we come into the revenue operations, we can zoom in like we're on a sort of Google map. We can start to get a sense mousing over of different teams and what they are, folks that are filling in different roles. And we can get a sense of who's doing what. Each person, if I click on Derry here, I actually can get a profile from Derry. Everything in Sobol is customizable. So a user profile We've seen lots of our different clients express different information using their custom fields, almost like a baseball card, if you will, of all the folks in the organization, or a quick start guide to each individual. And so we've seen lots of variation in terms of different things that people like to express, like interests, skills, tags, personal summaries, how I like to work, how to communicate with me, lots of different sort of ways to express a personal profile. Now, we clicked on Derry, and Derry's obviously in the sales lead role when we were zooming in, but on his profile, we can see all the different roles that Derry plays. So Derry's a sales lead, he's an account manager, he's doing channel sales, and he's a facilitator in one of the teams that he's participating in. So if we want to get a sense of accountability for a role, let's click on his sales lead role. And so in Sobol, each role can have a profile as well. So in this particular case, we have this sales lead role. We can see it's right here in the selling channels team. And the sales lead role, Gary's currently allocated into it, 40% of his time. The purpose of the role, and again, these fields are all customizable, and each team we've worked with, we find, has their own unique expression of how a role is set up, be it accountabilities, responsibilities, tagging accountability buddies. In this case, they've added a custom field for sort of the scope level of this role, everything from contributor to sort of C-level, as a means of indicating the scope and autonomy required to take on a role of this nature. This group has decided to create a custom field where they can select from a pick list of decision abilities to mark what decisions this role can make and be accountable for. In this case, Derry's able to take on budget and new hire approval. There is the ability to still put in, role-to-role reporting lines as per traditional org chart structure. So, accountable to the CEO in this position, and has the BD manager and client support, reporting in. So that's sort of a basic role profile for Derry. And if we were to look at this revenue operations team and click into it, we get a profile for the team. So there's another building block in our map of accountabilities and structure. And so this team has a primary contact of Reed Martin. So any notifications and smart alerts are going to be routed to Reed. We've got the team purpose. Again, these fields are customizable. The folks who are on the team and holding roles within the team are all these sub teams below. And we can see that inside of revenue operations, we have the team selling channels, marketing, customer success, and the Revops strategy circle. Each team has workspaces to help with these structural accountabilities and alignment. So the first one is the structure. So what we've been looking at here on the screen for the most part has been the structure in a circles view for the entire organization. We can actually just zoom in to the revenue operations structure by clicking into this workspace. And now I'm looking at the table view. So I could go back and I could look at the circles view. This is just the revenue operations team. I could go to the table view and start to expand out, some of the sub-circles, like the revenue operations strategy circle has a couple of roles. And this group is clearly helping sort of do a scrum of scrums meeting across the team. And so we can see Derry's playing a couple of roles in that team as well. And if we click in on that workspace, on the Revops strategy on its team, we can see it too has some workspaces. But before we dive deeper, let's check out the other workspaces we have. So we can manage the structure of the revenue operations team. The revenue operations team also has goals. So what's it in service to? What's it trying to achieve? This organization is doing a pretty sort of traditional objective and key results, or OKR strategy for their goals. But I'm going to show you how Sobol goals effectively can model all kinds of different things that strategically drive a team. So we've got simple construct of sections and goals. And in this case, the revenue operations team has taken their 2021 objectives and called out 2. So they're going to increase recurring revenue and reduce cost per acquisition. Now, in this particular organization, they were interested in putting these out there as strategic intent for the year, and they challenged the teams within revenue operations to come up with their ways in which they were going to support this. And so customer success, communications, lead management, retail partner management, they started to come up with their own objectives aligned to increasing recurring revenue. And we effectively start to see sort of a top-down, bottom-up simultaneous build-out of a strategic plan. Customer success then said, hey, we're going to reduce, average monthly churn, and each one of these goals has their own sort of card and profile. We've seen custom fields again be used to do things like reg report, at risk, on track, tagging, that type of thing. We've seen custom fields to define things like done criteria in a more explicit way, or why the goal exists. And goals have the ability to track progress as well. So they can have a due date, they can have clarity around owners, and they can have many different types. So we've got here a target goal because we're trying to reduce monthly average churn. I mean, I think our target for this should be 1.5, or current value maybe would be like 0.2, and let's say it started at 0. So that creates a target goal. We can see the expected progress for the goal and the current progress. And we're showing amber because we're a little bit off track in this case relative to the due date timeline. We can do a simple checklist for a done, not done type thing. We can do a % complete for a project or a milestone, or we can actually just calculate the progress from the sub goals below if we wish. So we'll see up here, for example, increasing the recurring revenue objective is decided to calculate progress based on all the goals below. So with this flexibility, you can start to build out lots of different ways to model accountability and alignment in goals, projects, milestones. We'll see that further down, they've actually used this to model projects. So they've got Project Alpha, there's milestone 1, milestone 2, Derry and Jillian taking those on. Calculated progress of Project Alpha is 38% based on, the progress that's coming from the milestones below. So that's an example of how you could have sort of multiple types of drivers or goals on the same team. Looking at this with a different configuration, let's go to the customer success team and let's go to their goals. So we're drilling down a little further into the organization, and inside of customer success, they've got that same OKR, reducing average monthly churn, that we were seeing was related to the Revops goal. So, if I click into that, I can see that the parent goal was increasing recurring revenue up at the Revops level. But they've also got a backlog. And so this is actually probably best viewed in Kanban mode. So we can also see our goals, not just in a table, but in a Kanban. So we've got for this customer success team, their 2021 OKRs, but they've got a backlog of things that they're trying to do to improve. They've got some in the R&D phase, some are being tested currently, and we can take a look at these projects that they're moving forward, like the new customer onboarding flow, for example. It's about 63% done. It has these sub goals in it, and seems like we're in the A/B test phase, and that would make sense because it's in the testing, column in the Kanban board. So this sort of shows the flexibility of goals and how they can be used at different levels in the organization to create dashboards of objectives and key results, all the way down to project backlogs and how we're working on those. So although many of our clients and customers don't take this all the way down to sort of the level where they're working in their own project management tools. This is more for that executive summary and showing the connections between all the work that they have in motion, and almost doing what traditionally would have been called that executive summary of the work, so that it can be transparently shared across the entire organization. So that's structure and goals. The last one that we hinted at in the intro deck was that agreements around how we're going to work are often implicit and kind of kept in the minds of the folks on the team who have, been there through the storming and norming phase. But they're, or if we're lucky, they've kind of been documented somewhere, but they often get lost into some sort of shared drive file system somewhere. And so what we've created for this are agreements, which is our third workspace. So if we were to take a look at inside the revenue operations, the Revops strategy circle, for example, we can go to their workspaces and check out their agreements. So this group is here to sort of meet on a monthly basis to align the strategy across revenue operations and govern sort of the cross Revops decisions. And so in their agreements section, they've formed agreements around, how they're working together. Initially, they may have just initialized their meeting format agreements. And so an agreement can link out to that, document, PDF drive file somewhere. But it creates a high level sort of sense of like why and when we created this agreement. So what was the point, get clear on how we host meetings, and we'll link out to perhaps the standing meeting agenda and format and practices we use, and we have an opportunity to see, okay, who formed this agreement, when was it formed, and sign it. As we join this team, we can explicitly agree to work in this way. Now, something I haven't highlighted is that every single object, we've been showing these building blocks of accountability and alignment, like people, teams, roles, goals, agreements. Every single one of them in Sobol has a history. So all the changes that are made are transparently shared. It's clear who did what and when. So obviously I here was the one who changed, get clear on how we host meetings in the summary section of this a few seconds ago. So, and the other element that's in here that some teams really enjoy using is when we're making change, hosting a discussion about that change. So perhaps, I wanted to indicate that I wasn't feeling so great about, meeting format is slow. We go OT, overtime all the time. So this is another thing it exists on everything in Sobol, is this construct of posts. So I'm using a sentiment input. I'm going to share my identity. It will automatically route to the owners of the agreement, although this is a demo agreement, so I haven't set the owners. Let's imagine that it was Derry again, who was the owner of this. It would automatically route to Derry, and we could send that. Others might come in and agree with that and react. Derry might come in and reply and say, thanks for this, Brian, let's chat, one-on-one to learn more. Over time, there might have been a discussion. There might have been during one of the meetings, we might have brought this up as an agenda topic, and we might have formed a decision, change to this new format. And we can mark this with a decision. So now if we come back to, this agreement meeting format, we take a look at the posts, we get a history now of some of the discussions. And if I want to see a filtered list of that to just the decisions that have been made, I can see over time how decisions have been marked against this agreement, and then therefore the changes that we made as a result of that. So do this now. And so between history and posts, we have a lot of power in terms of maintaining context of why we changed and what decisions we've been making over time. And this is just on one object, our agreement around our meeting format, but this can exist on everything in Sobol. So this agreement set has meeting format, but it also has an agreement around how we make decisions. It has an agreement on our dynamic budgeting process. There's lots of different forms of agreements that can be sort of set and marked in Sobol. I'll show one more set of advanced agreements in a service-oriented team, IT services. So if I come to their workspaces and check out their agreements board, it's quite a bit different. They've used the sections to structure a team handbook section. So it has, their work from home guide and a role advice process for when they're crafting new roles in this team, how they handle vacation, because they often need to have sort of on-call support within this group. They've also set up a section, because they're a services-oriented team, with some templates on services that they provide to the broader organization, like that they can do a business intelligence data analysis report or set up a new satellite office. And so this acts as almost like a services menu to the broader team. They also demark service level agreements that they form with various aspects of the organization. So for their ERP and intelligence SLA, they're working with the internal ops team and have formed an agreement around how they're going to manage this. The HIRS and HCM support has formed an agreement with the people team, between IT services and people team, in terms of how they're going to support this. And so we can see that that links out to a document that they have shared between them, and they have the opportunity to get very explicit about how they're contracting and working internally. And they have an active series of projects, and they decided to form agreements when they kick off projects with various teams. So for example, back in 2019, I would say this one is now closed and done. They were working with the executive circle to build out some new business intelligence reporting. So that shows the flexibility of agreements. So between roles and teams providing structure, agreements around how we're going to work together, and goals that can align everything from a small project or experiment we're running, all the way up to the strategic objectives of a function, like I showed in revenue operations, or even further up into the entire organization. It can all get connected together. And so what I've been showing for the most part are tables and Kanban boards and these circle views, but underlying this entire system is effectively a graph of all these connections between the teams, roles, users, goals, and agreements. And so this gives a sample of how the underlying model inside of Sobol is forming. We have this nice user interface on the front end, but what we're doing is making sure that everything is getting connected and aligned and accountable to one another and in service to one another inside the system. So a couple other small things that we see in Sobol are sort of the standards that we would expect, like a directory of people and being able to search for folks. In larger organizations, we can see this and plot this on a map and get a sense of where people are in the globe, and zoom in accordingly to those locations and get a sense of folks, and find folks in the organization, check out their profiles. And this is often used, if you're trying to spin up a new project or working group looking for folks of various skill sets. And we can save sort of some of these workspaces that we regularly operate in. So if I was part of the customer success team, I'd probably want my goals board saved, and we would come in here and run a meeting based on this backlog of experiments and projects that we were running in the customer success organization, and quickly make decisions, share this on the screen, and move things through. So that sort of brings me down to, as I said, there's a lot of customization in the custom fields and the various templates that we employ for each of these mapping blocks. And there's a fair amount there, as well as integrations into systems like single sign-on systems and people directory systems to get automatic syncing of information between those systems and Sobol. As well, we're in the late stages right now of an MS Teams integration that will allow Sobol Workspaces to be presented as tabs on MS Teams channels. So as well as these smart alerts that I mentioned, starting to move into platforms like MS Teams and Slack, whereas today they're email digests of the activity that you need to be notified of that might relate to you in the roles that you're playing and the changes that are surrounding you to help you maintain context as the system moves and evolves rather rapidly. So I'm going to stop there for Q&A to give us lots of time for that. I realized that one of the things about Sobol upon first introduction is that it can be quite daunting in terms of the complexity of the system and what it's mapping. And often, you know, this is an area that we work on regularly as a team, trying to reduce the complexity, make it easier to navigate, make it easier to quickly search for someone or something, you know, like dairy, or find roles, teams, these types of things. But yeah, part of it is that Sobol's about embracing this inherent complexity that already exists in our organization and trying to surface it so that everybody can make great decisions as they're operating. And we can start to distribute, move faster with greater agility without fear of losing trust and losing alignment and accountability in the system.
Okay, so thank you, Brian. A few people had to leave. They had meetings starting on the half hour. So they let us know they had to leave early. We have a question from someone that's still here, wondering if you've implemented this tool within a larger size, say 5,000 plus organization that already has elements in Sobol, but in separate systems. And so if so, what was the positive effects?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So yes, we've implemented into an organization that's over 1,000 you know, people. We're working with the CIO's office in doing so, and so in that particular case, you know, looking a little deeper into this question. So you know, integrations have become a big component of that rollout that we're doing with them. So we've been slowly building up some of the integrations that help drive information from their existing systems into Sobol. The other element of it is we've noticed that for those larger organizations, we're migrating first the stuff that was living in PowerPoint and spreadsheets still. So we're not, you know, trying to take away, you know, the power platform, project management platforms like Jira. Although I demonstrated we have that capability of going to that kind of granularity, as I mentioned, in these types of organizations, they already have something that's working at that level. And what they're often struggling with is being able to transparently communicate across the broader business, you know, how they're approaching these things. And they often did so in some form of, you know, shared PowerPoint deck that a, you know, cross-functional management group was getting involved with using. And we're migrating a lot of that stuff first. I hope that answers the question. I think Sobol has also done a number of proof of concepts of integrations into these types of project management platforms. So effectively goal updates automatically driving off of these subsystems, you know, be it Salesforce quota targets or, you know, Jira progress on release or epics. And we've had success in doing so, but interestingly enough, these organizations haven't told us yet to connect those systems because they were already employing a number of manual practices within the meetings where they were reviewing this information and making decisions.
Okay. I don't see a follow-up question on there. We have a small audience right now, especially with some people have left. So feel free to also just ask some questions live if folks have some questions.
Sure. I have a question. Excuse me. So I've worked with, on the topic or thread of large organizations, I've worked with a number of large organizations where they're all paranoid about who sees what. And while I'm not interested in, because my first thought was, what are the security layers like in terms of like visibility and access? Is Sobol designed to just be visible and accessible to everyone? Or what's that level of paranoia to security sort of relationship there?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. So most of the organizations that we're working with right now that, and I've experienced that myself in certain organizations I've participated in. The ones we're working with right now are actually, transparency is becoming sort of a major pillar, and they're trying to figure out how to do so responsibly. And so in a lot of cases, they might have some edges where they're not transcribing something into Sobol because they do want it to remain sort of in a private group. And we are starting to look at these edge cases, and wanting to build the construct of, you know, sort of a private circle or a draft circle or a private post. But that'll be something that comes, you know, a little later for us. And yeah, our ethos is, you know, sort of open by default with a high degree of accountability, based on that transparency around change. And smart alerts. If you're going to change something, you know, the people who are affected are going to be informed in our system. And so there's a philosophical alignment with our early adopting customers, that they're understanding they want to enhance their degrees of transparency in order to get more distributed decision making, and better alignment. But there may be a small percentage of activities that they are not, you know, moving into Sobol until they've matured to a certain level where they're comfortable to share that.
Cool. Thank you.
No, thanks for your question, Paul. It's a good one.
Other questions? I think we had another question. So someone was here from another company, and they were questioning around other systems and platforms that they have. So I think you answered that, and it'll be on the recording for that person. Anyone else have a question?
Hey, Brian, this is Drew. I was just wondering, what have you found to be like the key driver that other organizations bring to you as the way to open up the discussion with potentially bringing Sobol in? With all the things that it offers, you know, usually there's one thing that drives the conversation to be opened. What have you found that to be?
Yeah, so I would say the most dominant one is the explicit structure. So many organizations will not start with the, you know, the goals workspace or the agreements workspace, and they're recognizing, you know, conflict with the org chart in a sense that people are wearing lots of different hats and participating in lots of different ways, and the structure is far more matrixed or networked than their current diagrams help them with. And they almost want a repository where it's a source of truth, and there's a clear sort of logging of history of the transformation of that source of truth around their structure. And they're already embarking on some form of practice of getting explicit on that. And we often work in partnership with consultants when it comes to working with larger enterprise, because they have a program of change underway. It's focused in on that concept of explicit structure, or hey, what's our more dynamic structure and how do we keep track of it? And Sobol starts to become sort of the tool of choice at that point. And the bells and whistles that I've showed start to be the type of thing that they're interested in adopting as they're enhancing their practices. And I've seen organizations, some go to goals and want, because they've got some form of program around, you know, getting better at strategic alignment or strategic planning cycle happening. Or the other is, you know, they're really interested in the explicit agreements and cataloging and collecting all the different things that are in disparate spots and aligning them to the particular teams, making it easier for onboarding. So
yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting how one conversation opens the door to so many other things that they didn't realize were potentially a problem for them. Do you like toggle on and off certain features so they're able to bring in and adopt like a subset? But I'm assuming there's probably like you have like boots on the ground or some kind of consultant perspective where you can help them along, or maybe pilot an additional feature in, like I think you mentioned, you know, potentially bringing in. Do you find that to be something that has happened, or is that an availability? Because I know typically organizations are hesitant to just pull the trigger for the whole thing at one time. They want to maybe focus on one problem while they start to figure out like what does the rest of it potentially look like.
Yeah, and you're hinting at exactly one of the features we're building within the next quarter. And so what we have those workspaces. We're basically setting it up. So right now there's the 3 workspaces that are on by default. We're going to set it up so that you can actually build custom workspaces with different sort of filter parameters. Save the view and the filter parameters, name the workspace. And that allows effectively also to delete the workspaces that you may not want to use, but adopt those templates that we're offering at a later date. And so that's what we're sort of, we're evolving that to the sort of the next phase of that customization and flexibility that we're looking to. And it will solve that problem of, well, if we're not using it, we can remove it at time of configuration and rollout into the team.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Other questions? A lot people are here, but not on screen. So Brian, you mentioned, so people are having to sign off. Okay, so you mentioned the complexity of this and sometimes when you first see this. So I'm wanting to share what's the curve like, or the training curve, and how do you go about helping people if they choose to want to try this out with a part of their organization, let's say?
Yeah. So we find a couple of different things. So we often, when we're working with larger organizations where the rollout plan is quite important, as I said, our preference is often to partner with a consultant. We find the effectiveness goes through the roof in terms of having someone on the ground dedicated and who is oriented to the particular practices of that organization. If the organization is already sort of at a spot where they've stabilized and discovered their own practices, then our Sobol customer success team will help sort of white glove the configuration for them. They often have some sort of spreadsheet or an example of a dashboard they've pulled together, or some Visio file that's structured the new reorg they're wanting to embark on, and we can help show them how to translate that into the Sobol system and set up some templates as a part of our customer success group. But yeah, there's just something magical we find in larger organizations, when a partner is in the mix. And we're excited to be working with Michelle as one of our partners, and we're also expanding our partner program and building those relationships to help organizations be successful, because Tool is just so flexible in that regard.
Yeah, I'm excited to experiment with it with the client, with one of my clients. We have another question here. This is really thorough and very visual friendly with lots of layers of info. Is there any Siri-like feature? Can it talk? Can it talk to us?
Actually, I meant actually if instead of me finding the data, if the system can bring me the data.
Yeah. So yeah, we are a startup, so we're sort of progressively layering in features, and they're evolving. Right now, where we are on that curve is continuing to enhance the search capabilities and get more and more search in situ to the workspaces, so that if you're in a workspace and it starts to become a forest of information, being able to quickly search to filter to find what you're looking for, and having the search go deeper and deeper into sort of the fields and subfields and text and characters inside the fields and fuzzy matching. That's sort of the progression we're on right now. We do believe, though, that as we start to understand sort of the map, there is the opportunity, sort of a little further down the road, to start to understand through the graph of connections something you may not currently be aware of or following, and sort of surface that. So there's like some early ideas around the concept of like your homepage in Sobol, and it possibly surfacing some insights that may not be a part of your current accountabilities or subscriptions in Sobol. And so I think that might speak to sort of that intelligent surfacing of information, but I do believe it's a ways out. That said, we have an API, and we are very interested in partnering with an ecosystem of software partners over time. And so there's the opportunity to develop an app that mines the Sobol data and could surface something like that.
Is there plans to Thank you. Is there plans to tell me when I'm doing something wrong, Brian? Michelle, no, you shouldn't be here. You should be over there.
That's what great teammates are for. And
Exactly. We want all these smart things. We want everything smart, right?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Good questions. Any other questions here? What do you have? Good. Well, thank you all for being here. Is there anything else you want to share, Brian? So Brian is located in Canada, in Toronto, correct?
Yeah, just outside Toronto, about an hour and a half in a small area of Waterloo, home of BlackBerry and small tech ecosystem up here. Small but mighty tech ecosystem up here.
Waterloo!
Paul's a Canadian, yes?
I'm in Waterloo, yes.
You're in Waterloo. Ah, all right.
Just down the road in Wellesley, actually.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And if you have any further questions, you can reach out to me. If you want to talk directly with Brian, I could give you his information. We'll share it with you. And if you want to see more of what you saw today, but on a deeper level, we can sure enough give you that option. And I think, is there an ability to play around with the tool, Brian, for free? What do you have available for that?
Yeah, Sobol has a self-start free option, so you can get in there and up to 5 people can start exploring, using Sobol for free, and you can map out the broader team. And Sobol starts to enter a paid tier when you start to invite the broader team. So that at that rollout, so it gives Sobol a chance to really sort of get in there and do that self-start pilot, so to speak, in a fully automated way.
One of the ideas I had was to have coaches maybe try it out with their transformation team or office, their coach team, as a way to get oriented to it. It's a way to start to learn it themselves if it's something that they're going to bring to the organization. Yep. Great. All right. Well, thank you all so much, and good to have you here. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for your time and thoughtful questions.